November 18, 1944. 2:47 a.m. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Obergefreiter Klaus Schneider lay in the mud beside his burning Panzer IV, left leg shattered below the knee, bone fragments visible through torn flesh. 20 yards away, American voices shouted in English. The 19-year-old tank driver from Göttingen knew what came next. Capture, amputation, death. In that order. Gas gangrene infection killed 40% of soldiers with compound fractures on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht had no answer for it. The shrapnel from the American bazooka round had done more than destroy his tank and kill his crew. It had sentenced Schneider to die slowly, infected in an enemy prison camp. Or so he believed. Before we continue with Klaus Schneider's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to the Ardennes Forest, November 1944, where Klaus Schneider was about to experience something that would challenge everything he'd been told about his enemies. Klaus Schneider grew up in Göttingen, a university town in Lower Saxony. His father repaired agricultural machinery. His mother taught primary school. Klaus was the middle child of 5, neither the smartest nor the strongest, just average in every measurable way except one. He could drive anything with an engine. At 16, he was operating his father's repair shop alone when the older man fell ill. Tractors, trucks, even the mayor's temperamental Mercedes, Klaus fixed them all. When conscription papers arrived in April 1943, 3 months after his 18th birthday, Klaus reported to the Panzer training facility at Bergen without complaint. By August, he was driving a Panzer IV Ausf G in the 116th Panzer Division. His commander, Oberleutnant Werner Holst, told him once, "Schneider, you drive this tank like it's your father's tractor. Smooth, no wasted motion. That's why we're still alive." Klaus's best friend in the unit was Gefreiter Paul Richter, a gunner from Hamburg who talked endlessly about opening a motorcycle shop after the war. Richter and Schneider's garage. 50-50 partnership. They shook hands on it the night before the division moved into Belgium in September 1944. "First thing we do," Richter said, "is get one of those American Harley-Davidsons, take it apart, learn how the Americans build things, then we make better ones." Richter died on October 7, 1944, when an American M10 tank destroyer hit their Panzer from 800 meters. The armor-piercing round penetrated the turret. Richter was killed instantly. Klaus, in the driver's compartment, survived with ruptured eardrums and burns on his hands. He was transferred to a replacement Panzer IV within a week. By November 1944, German tank crews in the West were dying at unprecedented rates. Between September and December, the 116th Panzer Division lost 73% of its armor. The Americans had air superiority, better tanks arriving monthly, and an endless supply of replacements. German crews knew the statistics. Every morning formation was smaller than the day before. But it wasn't enemy fire that terrified Klaus the most. It was infection. On the Eastern Front, where Klaus had served briefly in early 1944, he'd seen what happened to men with serious leg wounds. Even if they survived the initial trauma, bacterial infection set in within days. Gas gangrene, caused by Clostridium bacteria in soil, was a death sentence. The tissue turned black, smelled like rotting meat, and spread rapidly. Field hospitals had one solution: immediate amputation. Even then, 30–40% died anyway. The Wehrmacht's standard treatment was sulfonamide powder, a primitive antibacterial drug developed in the 1930s. It barely worked. Klaus had watched men die screaming in field hospitals, their legs amputated at the hip, infection still spreading. There was no miracle cure. The German medical corps was frank about it. If you got gas gangrene, you probably died. By contrast, Klaus had heard rumors, dismissed as propaganda, that the Americans had some kind of wonder drug. Prisoners who returned in exchanges spoke of infections vanishing overnight. German intelligence dismissed these reports. Impossible. If such a drug existed, why wouldn't Germany have it? November 17, 1944, 11:20 p.m. Klaus's panzer was part of a reconnaissance force probing American positions near Bastogne. The mission was supposed to be simple: identify enemy positions, withdraw before dawn. But the Americans had night vision equipment and coordinated artillery. At 11:43 p.m., Klaus's tank was caught in a crossfire. He saw the muzzle flash, heard the impact, felt the explosion. The bazooka round hit the left track assembly and detonated near Klaus's position. The explosion tore through the hull, sending jagged steel and debris into his left leg. Klaus felt white-hot pain, then nothing. The tank lurched to a stop. Fire erupted in the engine compartment. Klaus tried to move his leg and screamed. Bone was visible through the torn flesh. Blood pooled in the driver's compartment. He heard his commander, Oberleutnant Holst, shouting to evacuate. Klaus pushed himself out of the hatch using his arms, dragging his shattered leg. He collapsed in the mud 10 meters from the burning tank. Holst and the 2 surviving crew members ran into the darkness. Klaus tried to follow. He couldn't stand. His left leg wouldn't support weight. The bone was broken in at least 2 places. American voices approached. Flashlights swept across the wreckage. Klaus lay still, hoping they'd pass. They didn't. A soldier, medic's armband visible in the firelight, knelt beside Klaus, speaking rapid English. Klaus understood none of it. The medic applied a tourniquet above the knee, injected morphine, and called for a stretcher. Klaus was carried to an American aid station, then loaded onto a truck heading west. He faded in and out of consciousness. Each time he woke, the pain was worse. By dawn, he could smell something wrong with his leg. Sweet, rotten, organic decay. Gas gangrene. He knew the smell from field hospitals. By the time he reached the 45th Evacuation Hospital, established in a former Belgian schoolhouse 40 kilometers behind American lines, Klaus was feverish and delirious. An American doctor, Captain James Morrison from Philadelphia, though Klaus wouldn't learn his name for days, examined the wound. The infection had spread rapidly. The tissue around the wound site was discolored, swollen, with visible gas bubbles under the skin, textbook gas gangrene. In a German field hospital, the protocol was clear: immediate amputation above the infection site. But Morrison did something different. He debrided the wound, cutting away dead tissue, irrigating with saline solution. Then he prepared a syringe with a yellowish liquid Klaus had never seen before. Penicillin, Morrison said in English, not expecting Klaus to understand. He injected 100 Zy-0 units directly into the muscle tissue around the wound, then administered another 100 Zy-0 units intramuscularly in Klaus's hip. He repeated this process every 3 hours, around the clock. Klaus expected to die. Gas gangrene infections didn't reverse. Every soldier knew this. You amputated quickly or you died slowly. There was no middle option. The Germans had tried everything: sulfonamides, antiseptic irrigation, experimental serums from occupied laboratories in Prague and Vienna. Nothing worked reliably against Clostridium bacteria in deep tissue infections. Except Klaus didn't die. 72 hours after the first penicillin injection, Klaus woke with a clear head for the first time since his capture. The fever had broken. He looked down at his leg, expecting to see a stump wrapped in bandages. Instead, he saw his leg still attached, the wound cleaned and dressed, but recognizably healing. The blackish discoloration was fading. The smell of rot was gone, replaced by the sharp odor of antiseptic. A nurse, Staff Sergeant Dorothy Chen from San Francisco, he'd later learn, checked his temperature and smiled. "You're going to keep it," she said in slow, simple English, pointing to his leg. Klaus understood from her gesture, if not her words. He stared at her, uncomprehending. This didn't happen. Infections like his didn't reverse. Men didn't keep legs with gas gangrene. This violated everything he'd learned in Wehrmacht medical briefings, but the evidence was undeniable. His leg was healing. The infection was retreating. Whatever the Americans had given him, this penicillin Morrison kept mentioning, was working in a way sulfonamides never had. Over the next 14 days, Klaus received penicillin injections every 3 hours, 100 D1 units, intramuscular, with additional topical applications to the wound site. The infection didn't just stop spreading, it reversed. Healthy pink tissue grew where blackened flesh had been. Klaus's temperature normalized, his appetite returned. By day 10, he could move his toes. By day 14, he could bear weight on the leg with assistance. Captain Morrison examined Klaus on day 16 and declared the infection eliminated, complete bacterial clearance. The fracture would take months to heal fully, requiring surgery to set the bone properly and physical therapy to restore function. But there was no amputation, no death. Klaus Schneider, Obergefreiter, 116th Panzer Division, Wehrmacht, would walk again because his enemies had saved him with medicine his own country couldn't produce. Klaus asked through an interpreter what the drug was. Morrison explained, "Penicillin, discovered by Scottish scientist Alexander Fleming in 1928, developed into a mass-produced antibiotic by American and British pharmaceutical companies starting in 1942. By 1944, American factories were producing 650 billion units per month, enough to treat every Allied soldier with bacterial infections, plus thousands of Axis prisoners. The Germans had nothing comparable." Fleming's discovery had been published in scientific journals before the war, available to German researchers. But Nazi leadership prioritized weapons production over medical research. German pharmaceutical companies attempted to synthesize penicillin in 1943, using Fleming's published methodology, but couldn't scale production beyond laboratory samples. By 1944, the Third Reich was fighting a war without antibiotics, while its enemies had an unlimited supply. The difference was staggering. In the North Africa campaign, 1942 to 1943, before widespread penicillin deployment, Allied soldiers with infected wounds had a 30% mortality rate. After mass penicillin distribution in late 1943, that rate dropped to 4%. British field hospitals in Italy reported saving 9 out of 10 soldiers with gas gangrene infections using penicillin protocols. German hospitals reported the opposite. 9 out of 10 died, even with immediate amputation. Klaus learned all of this from Morrison during his recovery. The American doctor, who spoke some German learned from medical school textbooks, explained the science. Penicillin disrupted bacterial cell wall formation. Clostridium bacteria couldn't reproduce in its presence. The infection literally died off, cell by cell, while human tissue regenerated. "Your country could have had this," Morrison told Klaus during one examination. "Fleming published everything. The science was available to everyone, but someone decided bombs were more important than medicine." Klaus had no answer for this. He thought about Paul Richter, who died instantly from tank fire. He thought about the men he'd seen die slowly in Wehrmacht field hospitals, screaming as gas gangrene consumed their bodies. He thought about his own leg, whole and healing, saved by the enemies he'd been trained to kill. The 45th Evacuation Hospital treated 847 German POWs between October 1944 and February 1945. Of these, 203 had serious infections requiring penicillin treatment. The survival rate was 96%. 4 men died, 2 from wounds too severe to treat, 2 from allergic reactions to penicillin itself. A rare but known complication. The rest recovered, including 67 amputees who would have died from post-surgical infections without antibiotic treatment. Word spread among German POWs. The Americans had a miracle drug. Men captured with infected wounds, expecting death or amputation, instead found themselves healing. Some refused to believe it was real, suspecting propaganda or psychological warfare. Klaus Schneider was proof it wasn't. He walked out of the hospital on February 12, 1945, with a pronounced limp, but both legs functional, transferred to a POW camp in southern England to await the war's end. The German High Command knew about penicillin by late 1943. Intelligence reports from captured Allied medical supplies confirmed its existence. Interrogated POWs reported its effectiveness. But the Nazi leadership made a calculated decision. Attempting to reverse engineer and mass-produce penicillin would require resources, industrial capacity, chemical precursors, trained personnel that were already stretched to breaking point, maintaining weapons production. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring received a briefing on penicillin in January 1944. His response, according to declassified Allied intelligence intercepts, "We need tanks and planes, not medicines for wounded men who can't fight anymore." This philosophy permeated German military medicine. The Wehrmacht had excellent battlefield surgery techniques, skilled doctors, and efficient trauma protocols. But once infection set in, soldiers died. The Allies made the opposite calculation. American pharmaceutical companies, led by Pfizer and Merck, received government contracts to industrialize penicillin production using deep tank fermentation, a process that allowed mass cultivation of Penicillium mold. By mid-1944, production reached levels where every Allied soldier could be treated. The drug that took Alexander Fleming 12 years to discover and purify was being manufactured by the ton. The strategic implications were profound. Armies that could keep wounded soldiers alive and return them to duty had a cumulative advantage. An American soldier wounded in France in June 1944 could be treated with penicillin, recover in England, and return to his unit by September. A German soldier with the same wound faced amputation or death. Over the course of 1944-1945, penicillin saved an estimated 12 to 15% of Allied wounded who would have otherwise died from infection. That translated to tens of thousands of experienced soldiers remaining in combat units. From the German perspective, there was bitter irony. Alexander Fleming was European. His discovery happened at St. Mary's Hospital in London. The science was published openly in British medical journals. Any nation with industrial chemistry capability could have manufactured penicillin, but only the Allies, specifically the Americans with their massive pharmaceutical infrastructure, did so at scale. German medical officers in POW camps captured in 1944-1945 were stunned by penicillin. Dr. Heinrich Kroll, chief medical officer of the 12th SS Panzer Division, captured in December 1944, underwent treatment for pneumonia at a British military hospital. He recovered in 6 days using penicillin. In his post-war memoir, he wrote, "I watched British medics distribute penicillin to German prisoners as casually as we distributed aspirin. The disparity in medical capability between our nations was as great as the disparity in industrial production. We'd lost the war before the first shot was fired." Klaus Schneider remained in British POW camps until July 1946. He was repatriated to Germany, returning to Göttingen to find his family's home damaged but standing. His father's repair shop was rubble. Klaus rebuilt it slowly, using skills learned before the war and mechanical knowledge gained from 3 years maintaining panzers. He married in 1948 Anna Weber, a nurse who'd worked in Göttingen's civilian hospital during the war. They had 3 children. Klaus never spoke about the war except once, when his oldest son asked about his limp. Klaus told him about November 18, 1944, about the bazooka round, the shattered leg, the infection that should have killed him, about the American doctor who used medicine Klaus didn't know existed. "The men we fought against saved my life," Klaus said. "They didn't have to. I was the enemy. But they did it anyway. That's the part of the war I remember most." Klaus Schneider died in 1998 at age 73 from heart failure. His obituary in the Göttingen Tageblatt mentioned his military service in one sentence: served in the Wehrmacht, 1943-1945. Nothing about the Panzer crews, the Eastern Front, the Ardennes, or the American medics who saved him. But in the Imperial War Museum in London, there's a small exhibit on wartime medical advances. One display case contains a vial of 1944-era penicillin, yellowed with age, alongside documentation from the 45th Evacuation Hospital. The placard reads, "Penicillin saved over 100 Hohenzollern Allied soldiers and thousands of Axis prisoners. Medical superiority, not just military, defined the difference between the Allies and their adversaries." No photographs of Klaus Schneider appear in the exhibit. No mention of his name. He was one of thousands, a footnote in the story of a drug that changed warfare, but he walked with a limp for 54 years, proof that sometimes, even in war, humanity survives. Klaus Schneider kept one object from the war, hidden in a shoebox in his bedroom closet for 50 years. Not a medal. He'd thrown those away in 1946. Not a photograph of his Panzer crew. Too painful. What Klaus kept was a small glass vial, empty, with faded markings on a paper label. Penicillin G 100 Reunten units, U.S. Army Medical Corps, 1944. He'd stolen it from the 45th Evacuation Hospital in January 1945 during his final week before transfer to England. Staff Sergeant Chen had been changing his bandages, had stepped away briefly. Klaus saw the empty vial in the medical waste bin. He took it. No one noticed. For 50 years, Klaus never told anyone why he kept it. Not Anna, his wife, not his children. It was simply there, wrapped in old newspaper, buried under winter scarves and forgotten letters. Sometimes late at night, when his leg ached, phantom pain from fractures that never quite healed right, Klaus would take out the vial, hold it up to the bedroom lamp, and remember. November 1994. Klaus Schneider, now 69 years old, received a letter from the Imperial War Museum in London. The museum was preparing a major exhibition on medical advances in World War II. Through German veterans associations, they'd identified former POWs treated with penicillin in Allied hospitals. Klaus's name appeared in archived records from the 45th Evacuation Hospital. Would he be willing to participate in an oral history project? Klaus didn't respond immediately. Anna found him at the kitchen table, reading and rereading the letter. "What is it?" she asked. "They want to interview me," Klaus said. "About the war, about the hospital." "Are you going to do it?" Klaus looked at his hands, scarred from decades of mechanical work. "I don't know." "What would I say?" "The truth," Anna said simply. "You always told the children the truth when they asked." 3 weeks later, Klaus Schneider traveled to London for the first time since 1946. The museum arranged accommodations, covered expenses, treated him with courtesy that surprised him. He was still the enemy, wasn't he? 50 years later, weren't old soldiers still supposed to hate each other? The interview took place in a small museum office, filmed on video equipment Klaus didn't understand. The historian conducting the interview was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a British woman in her 40s who specialized in military medical history. She'd read Klaus's medical file, knew the details of his treatment, but wanted to hear it from him directly. "Tell me about November 18, 1944, Dr. Mitchell said. Klaus told her everything. The bazooka round, the shattered leg, the smell of gas gangrene, Captain Morrison's injections, the impossibility of surviving that kind of infection with Wehrmacht medicine. The slow realization that his enemies were saving him with technology his own side didn't possess. Dr. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When Klaus finished, she asked, "How did that change your understanding of the war?" Klaus was quiet for a long moment. "I thought we were fighting for survival," he said finally. "That's what they told us. Germany against the world, civilization against barbarism. Then I'm lying in an American hospital dying from an infection, and the barbarians saved my life. Not because they had to, because they could." "Did you ever try to contact the medical personnel who treated you?" "No," Klaus said. "What would I say? Thank you for not letting me die." It seemed insufficient. Dr. Mitchell smiled gently. "Captain James Morrison is still alive. He's 81, living in Pennsylvania. I spoke with him last week. He remembers you." Klaus stared at her. "That's impossible. He must have treated hundreds of men." "He kept a journal," Dr. Mitchell said. "He wrote about the German POWs he treated. You were one of the youngest. He wrote that you reminded him of his younger brother." She pulled out a photocopy from a manila folder. Klaus recognized the handwriting immediately, though he'd never seen Morrison's notes before. The entry was dated November 21, 1944. "German tank driver Aproxes, 19 years old. Compound fracture left tibia, fibula with advanced gas gangrene. Severe case would be amputation in any Wehrmacht hospital. Started aggressive penicillin protocol. He looks terrified. Can't tell if it's fear of dying or fear of us." Maybe both. Reminds me of Bobby at that age. Just a kid who got drafted into the wrong army. Klaus's hands trembled, holding the paper. Bobby? Captain Morrison's younger brother, Dr. Mitchell explained. Killed at Normandy, June 1944, 5 months before he treated you. Klaus set the paper down carefully. His throat was tight. He saved me 5 months after losing his brother to German guns. Yes, Dr. Mitchell said quietly. I would like to speak with him, Klaus said, if that's possible. Dr. Mitchell made it possible. 1 week later, Klaus Schneider stood in the lobby of a Philadelphia hotel, waiting. Anna was with him. She'd insisted on coming, said this was too important for Klaus to do alone. At 3:00 p.m. exactly, the elevator doors opened. An elderly man stepped out, walking with a cane, white-haired and thin. But Klaus recognized the eyes immediately. Captain James Morrison, M.D., retired, looked at Klaus Schneider for the first time in 50 years. Neither man spoke at first. Then Morrison extended his hand. You kept the leg, he said in German, heavily accented but comprehensible. Klaus shook his hand, felt tears threatening. You kept your promise. He replied in English, equally accented. They sat in the hotel restaurant for 4 hours. Morrison told Klaus about the war from the medical side, the frustration of watching men die from infections before penicillin arrived, the revolution when it became available, the knowledge that German doctors were still operating like it was 1918. We weren't better doctors, Morrison said. We just had better tools. Klaus told Morrison about rebuilding his life after the war, the repair shop, the children, the quiet decades of civilian life. I never forgot what you did, Klaus said. Every time my leg hurt, every time I walked instead of using crutches or a wheelchair, I thought about November 1944. Morrison was quiet, then said, I thought about you too. Wondered if the treatment held, if the infection came back, if you survived the war. He paused. I'm glad you did. Your brother, Klaus said carefully. Bobby, I'm sorry. Morrison nodded slowly. He was 22, Omaha Beach, machine gun fire, died before the medics could reach him. He looked directly at Klaus. For a long time I was angry. Angry at the Germans, angry at the war, angry at God. Then I started treating POWs, German boys the same age as Bobby, wounded the same way. And I realized they didn't start this war either. We still fought in it, Klaus said. Yes, Morrison agreed. But that doesn't mean I had to let you die. Hippocratic Oath doesn't have an exception for enemy soldiers. Before they parted, Klaus gave Morrison the empty penicillin vial he'd kept for 50 years. I stole this, Klaus admitted, from your hospital. I wanted something to prove it really happened, that it wasn't a dream. Morrison held the vial, turned it over in his hands, smiled. I should report you for theft of U.S. Army property, he said, mock serious. Then his face softened. Keep it. You earned it. No, Klaus said. You keep it. It means more to you than to me. Bobby's story and mine, they're connected. Maybe this should be with someone who understands both. Morrison's eyes were wet. He nodded, pocketed the vial carefully. The Imperial War Museum exhibition opened in March 1995. One display case featured Klaus Schneider's story, alongside 19 other German POWs treated with penicillin. The centerpiece was Morrison's journal, open to the November 21st entry, with the stolen penicillin vial placed beside it. A photograph showed Klaus and Morrison in Philadelphia, 2 old men shaking hands across 50 years and a war. The placard read, Medical innovation transcended national boundaries. While political leaders waged war, doctors and nurses on both sides fought death. Sometimes, humanity survived where hatred could not. Klaus Schneider died in 1998, 3 years after the exhibition opened. James Morrison attended the funeral in Göttingen, flew to Germany at age 84, insisted on being there despite his family's concerns. He stood in the rain at the cemetery, leaning on his cane as Klaus was buried in the town where he'd been born. Anna Schneider approached Morrison after the service. Thank you for coming, she said. Klaus would have wanted you here. He was a patient, Morrison said, but more than that. He was proof that the medicine worked, that we were doing something right in all that wrong. Morrison died in 2003 at age 89. His obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer mentioned his military service. Decorated U.S. Army medical officer, World War II, treated over 200 wounded soldiers. In his will, Morrison left the stolen penicillin vial to the Imperial War Museum with specific instructions that it remain displayed next to Klaus Schneider's story. The exhibit is still there. The vial, the journal entry, the photograph of two old soldiers who'd been enemies and became something else. Visitors pause, read the story, move on. Most don't realize what they're seeing, proof that even in humanity's darkest moments, some people chose to heal rather than harm. The museum keeps Morrison's journal in climate-controlled storage. Researchers sometimes request access. On November 21st each year, the anniversary of Klaus's first penicillin injection, a small notation appears in the museum's internal calendar. Morrison Schneider Remembrance. 3 staff members, those who've worked with the exhibit longest, observe a moment of silence. No official ceremony, no public event. Just acknowledgement that 79 years ago, an American doctor saved a German soldier's life, and both men carried that choice forward until their deaths. If this story moved you, hit that like button to help these forgotten stories reach more people. Subscribe so you never miss another account of courage and innovation from World War II, and drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, or share if anyone in your family served. These stories matter because people like you keep them alive. Thank you for honoring these memories with us.